Hi there, this is the video for lecture 4. In this lecture, we'll talk about cities and their districts. Today's content. In the first part, we'll be looking at the theories and facts about districts in cities. In the second part, we'll be learning how to argue for your findings in research papers. Okay, let's start part 1. In the first section, we're going to look at the concept of urban district. We'll see that cities are made up of many different districts. First, let me look at what inner cities and outer cities are. Typically, cities have walls. The areas inside the city walls are called inner cities, and the areas outside the walls are called outer cities. Okay, so these walls separate the inside and the outside of the cities. This is the most basic distinction of districts of cities. However, when a country as a whole or the world become modernized, the forms of such districts begin to change. So let's look at two patterns of such changes. One of the patterns of a change is urbanization. In the modernization process, city walls are deconstructed and taken away, and inner city areas begin to expand and become larger than before. Okay, this is the new inner city areas. As more people come in to live in these areas, these places gradually become populated, or sometimes, or in some cases, they are overpopulated. These are what happen in urbanization process. Another major pattern of change is suburbanization. As the inner city areas become larger, outer city areas go farther. These areas outside of such inner city areas are now regarded as outer city areas. Okay, so this is kind of a new areas for outer cities. And when inner city residents hate overpopulation, they want to go out of inner cities and they go out to outer cities. Their residential areas in these outer cities are often called suburbs or suburban areas. As these suburban areas become something like cities, they may be called satellite cities or edge cities. So please remember all these very basic names, please. These tendencies are called suburbanization processes. All in all, these two patterns, one is urbanization, the two is suburbanization, both proceed in the modernization process. However, these are the patterns that occur only in the phases where population constantly increases. But on the contrary, we need to look at the phases where there are less people with small numbers of children and immigrants. In such cases, the city population decreases, right? So such cities begin to shrink. They gradually become smaller and smaller. These new smaller cities are called compact cities or smart cities. They are the cities with less people, less buildings, and less social services than before. But some of such cities are connected to each other via transportation, via information and communication technologies, and other technological things, so that these cities can survive such situation. Okay, these are probably the near, very close future of most developed countries' cities. But unfortunately, in this lecture, we will not be looking at these kinds of future types of cities, but I'd like you to remember such future patterns of the cities because you are in the younger generation than me, and you will be facing such future patterns of the cities and when you grow up. Okay, let's look at the quizzes. One, generally speaking, inner city areas expand in size when urbanization process go on. Two, urbanization process typically results in more population in inner city areas, whereas more people live in outer city areas in suburbanization process. However, these processes do not occur at the same time. Is it true or false? All right, that's all about the first section. So let's go to the second section. All right, in the second section, we are going to look at the historical facts. We'll see changing outlook of cities. In ancient and the medieval age, East Asian cities typically had a specific form. Their form was square. This is the example of Kaifang in China. The city had 3 walls. The first wall is for palace, and the second wall is for inner city. And the outside of this second wall was outer city. But there is nothing around the outer city. So areas that are outside of the third wall are rural areas. It means that this third wall divides the urban areas and rural areas. Okay, this is what East Asian cities looked like. Let's look at the Mediterranean cities too. In this picture, the city of Constantinople is drawn. Constantinople was once called Byzantium, and now it is called Istanbul. It's it's the biggest city in the Republic of Turkey today. This city had its first wall around the palace. It also had 2 other walls around the city areas. Inside these walls, we find many constructions such as churches and other facilities. But outside of these walls were rivers, oceans, and the rural lands. So, from these examples of the eastern and the western cities, we know that medieval cities typically had walls, right? However, Industrial Revolution had the effects to change the outlook of such cities. Look at this picture, please. This is the picture of Cottonopolis. This was the name for Manchester in the United Kingdom. The city of Manchester had been famous for producing cotton products since around the 16th century, but through 17th centuries, this city became one of the original cities of the Industrial Revolution by making a vast amount of cotton products. So this city was called Cottonopolis. This picture was drawn in 19th century. Look at the picture. This here we find so many factories, right? And there are many chimneys and there are smokes coming from these chimneys. This is how industrial cities look like. These industries attracted many workers in these cities. So this is why modern cities began to expand, as we already saw in the previous section. As old cities have more people like these cities got more crowded. Therefore, governments in the developed countries began to change and redevelop such traditional cities. This is the picture of Prefect Mr. Osman. He was an official. He was a French official of the government in the 19th century. He insisted that Paris has to have a beautiful outlook, and he insisted that that city of Paris doesn't need to have dirty areas. So he planned and conducted the construction of old walls, old streets, and old buildings. And this he get. This is one of the big and beautiful boulevard he created. This is said one of the beginnings of modern city plannings. In the 20th century, however, more modernist city plannings began. This is the picture which drew one of the most famous ideal city. Okay, so this is the picture of not existing cities. Okay, this is the model of that kind of ideal city. This ideal city was planned by Mr. Le Corbusier. He was the greatest city planner in the century, and he insisted that cities should have office building and an apartment that go upward. It means that they should be as tall as possible so that citizens have many parks and greens in the ground levels. Okay, this is the idea of this modernist planner of modern cities. But how do the actual modern cities look like? Let's look at actual district structures. There are two prominent types of urban district structures. Such structures have been long studied in the US, so let's look at typical cities, typical city types of the United States. This illustration shows the first of such structures. This is called the sectoral model that was originally developed in the city of Chicago, Illinois. At the center of the city is found Central Business District. Around this district is the transportation and industry zones. There are many factories and companies and company offices in these zones. And along these zones are low-class areas. They are poor and sometimes dirty areas because they are next to big factories. Outside of such poor areas are the places for middle-class people. And rich-class people go far away because they have their own cars and because they want clean greens and clean air. So they move toward the outside of the cities. This movement is called sprawling. This sprawling tendency is one of the major factors that developed suburban communities in America. So this model has been regarded as the very typical type of modern cities. But a really different type is also known in the 21st century. This type is sometimes called postmodern cities. This model was first developed in Los Angeles, the state of California. It is said that there are no core or no central districts in modern cities, in postmodern cities. Instead of having a core district, there are many symbolic and super functional places. There are big amusement parks, and there are many places for big shopping malls and places for business buildings, among others. So we see that these postmodern city models are quite different from typically modern cities. Okay, these are the differences between Chicago and Los Angeles, Los Angeles, but it is between it is the difference between modern and most modern cities. From these models, we know that there are various types of urban district structure. Historically looking, we now know that some of them appeared and the others disappeared, but many of them are still surviving and competing today. These city changes and these variety of city models resulted in the changes in populations. Let's take a city of London as an example. From 1930s to 70s, population in inner London decreased, and instead, population in outer London increased. So it shows that people went out of the city. This is the phenomenon of suburbanization, as we already saw in the previous chapters. But after this period, something else happened. From 1980s and toward 2010, population in inner London has been growing up. It means people are coming from outer London or somewhere else, from other cities or other countries. Anyway, this tendency is seen as reurbanization process. So we have now urbanization, suburbanization, and reurbanization. Okay, we need to, look at each type separately. Many cities in developed countries have experienced the similar tendencies, a similar reurbanization process after the suburbanization processes. On the contrary, in the countries like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, both urbanization and suburbanization are still going on. However, it is estimated that 20 years or 30 years later from now, such processes like urbanization and suburbanization will begin to end, as in the developed countries. And after that, even such developing countries will see this kind of reurbanization process. So, in the next section, we would like to focus on what happened in such reurbanization processes in the developed countries in this 50 years long period. So let's look at the quizzes for this second section. 1. Following industrialization and urbanization, most walls of medieval cities were taken away. Is it true or false? 2. Redevelopment planning of cities have been proposed, and some of them were actually implemented by public officials such as Prefect Osman and expert planners like Le Corbusier. Is it true or false? 3. All the actual modern cities have central business districts and the surrounding residential areas for low class and middle class citizens. Is it true or false? All right, that's all for this second section. So let's go on to the third section.